The narrator sat at his desk while classmates moved through routine without looking. Kim Do-hyun smirked and traded taunts from across the room. The narrator kept his face down and checked messages from anonymous accounts again. Two mocking students traded cruel lines and dismissed rules since the death. The narrator lifted his head to ask who sent the texts. Without warning, a student grabbed a chair and swung it at him. The blow struck his head and blood spattered. Someone shouted a name in shock. The narrator had kept his head down amid whispers and anonymous messages at his desk. A smirking student rose and seized a classroom chair with sudden violent intent. He swung the chair hard and struck the narrator's head without warning. Blood spattered across papers and the desk in a stark instantaneous spray. Classmates gasped and recoiled as the classroom filled with shocked silence and confusion. Someone shouted a name and several students leaned forward in visible alarm. A girl cried out and reached for the narrator as bodies surged toward them. A teacher pushed through the crowd toward them but could not stop the next blow. The narrator slumped, disoriented, while the room spun into frantic motion around him. The narrator had kept his head down amid whispers and anonymous messages at his desk. A smirking student seized a chair and struck his head again without warning. Blood spattered across papers while classmates gasped and the room froze in alarm. Someone shouted the name Kim Soo-hak and voices shifted to accusing panic. The attacker grinned as another student kicked at him to stop the assault. The narrator slumped and tried to clear his vision. Fear and focus jostled. He thought that letting Kim Soo-hak go would bring him serious trouble. The narrator had kept his head down amid whispers and anonymous messages at his desk. A smirking student seized a chair and struck his head again without warning. Blood spattered across papers while classmates gasped in alarm. Someone shouted Kim Soo-hak's name and voices shifted to accusing panic. Unknown attacker grinned as another student kicked at him to stop the assault. Unknown attacker then swung a bat and shattered a locker panel while a female student screamed. The narrator slumped and tried to clear his vision. He feared letting Kim Soo-hak go would bring trouble. The narrator kept his head down amid whispers and anonymous messages in the classroom. A smirking student grabbed a chair and struck the narrator's head without warning, spraying blood across papers and desks. Classmates gasped and one voice shouted Kim Soo-hak's name, turning the room toward accusing panic. The unknown attacker grinned as another student kicked at him to halt the assault. The attacker then swung a bat and shattered a locker panel while a female student screamed. The narrator slumped and blinked to clear his vision, afraid that letting Kim Soo-hak go would bring worse trouble. The smirking student grabbed a chair and struck the narrator without warning. The narrator fell to the floor and pressed his hands to his head. Blood flecked papers and desks as classmates gasped. An unknown attacker grinned while another student kicked to halt him. The attacker swung again and shattered a locker panel and a female student screamed. The narrator slumped and blinked to clear his vision. He feared naming Kim Soo-hak would invite worse retribution. A phone lay face up on a desk. It lit with a message from Octopus asking if someone was truly wanted dead. The narrator's eye widened as panic closed in. The smirking student lunged with a chair and struck the narrator without warning. The narrator collapsed and cupped his head as blood flecked papers and desks. Classmates gasped while an unknown attacker grinned and stepped forward. A nearby student kicked to stop him, but the attacker swung again and shattered a locker panel. A female student screamed. The narrator slumped and blinked to clear his vision. He feared naming Kim Soo-hak would bring worse retribution. A phone on a desk lit with a message from Octopus asking if someone was truly wanted dead. Panic closed in on the narrator. The smirking student lunged and struck the narrator with a chair. The narrator collapsed and cupped his head as blood flecked papers and desks. Classmates gasped while the unknown attacker grinned and stepped forward. A nearby student kicked to stop him, but the attacker swung again and shattered a locker panel. A female student screamed. The narrator slumped and blinked to clear his vision. He feared naming Kim Soo-hak would bring worse retribution. A phone on a desk lit with a message from Octopus asking if someone was truly wanted dead. Panic tightened around him as he weighed death over submission and searched for another way. After the chair blow, the narrator collapsed and cupped his head as blood flecked papers. Classmates gasped while the unknown attacker grinned and smashed a locker panel nearby. A female student screamed as peers rushed forward to block him. A phone on a desk lit with a message from Octopus asking if someone was wanted dead. Panic tightened around him while he weighed death against submission with no option. A shadowed student loomed behind and taunted him, pushing him toward forced action. He thought he could not act alone and found conscience useless in the moment. He resolved to kill them and to manipulate the group chat toward a death camera pretense. After the chair strike, the narrator lay curled and held his head as blood-stained papers. He read the octopus message and felt panic tighten, then turned that fear into a plan to manipulate the group chat. He rose and forced a neutral face. He moved through the classroom and spoke lightly to a female student to hide intent. The exchange briefly startled peers who laughed and backed away. They left school together and traded short, cold words. A curt remark accused him of ignoring her, while his decision to act grew quieter and harder. He remained curled, holding his head, while blood-stained, scattered papers on the floor. He checked the octopus message and felt panic tighten, then bent that panic into a cold plan to manipulate the group chat. He put on a neutral face and moved through the classroom, speaking lightly to a female student to conceal intent. Her casual words carried a sharp truth. She already knew about DATHCOL, which snapped him into shocked silence. A memory surfaced of always being beside NewAgeManhwa, and the recollection tightened his nerves. He swallowed and let his decision grow quieter and harder. He lay curled, pressing his head as blood darkened scattered papers on the floor. He read the octopus message and felt panic coil, then he shaped it into a cold plan. He kept a neutral face and drifted through the classroom. He spoke casually to a female student to hide intent. Her casual comment confirmed DATHCOL and froze him. A memory of always standing beside NewAgeManhwa tightened his resolve. Later, a smirking student asked if someone was the cat, and another answered bingo, revealing Lee Sujin. He questioned her motives and whether she still liked him. Lee Sujin stepped closer and quietly asked to talk. He had been wounded and kept a neutral face as he moved through class. He had read the octopus message and planned coldly to protect NewAgeManhwa. Smirking classmates named Lee Sujin as the cat. He confronted that shock internally. Lee Sujin stepped closer and asked to talk about running away to him. She smiled, then blushed and framed the request as a simple, honest talk. He parsed her words and tested whether he would show any emotion. He decided to reveal some plans to unsettle others and regain control. He had kept a neutral face and moved through class despite fresh pain. He read the octopus message and planned how to protect NewAgeManhwa. Classmates smirked and named Lee Sujin the cat, which he absorbed without visible emotion. Lee Sujin approached and asked to talk about running away, framing it as honest. She smiled, then blushed and offered a lollipop while prodding him. He parsed her words and revealed controlled plans to unsettle others and regain control. When she pushed further, his restraint cracked. He shouted no, and a sudden scuffle began. He had kept a neutral face despite fresh pain and read the octopus message while planning to protect NewAgeManhwa. Classmates had smirked and called Lee Sujin the cat, which he absorbed. Lee Sujin approached, prodded him about running away, then pushed further until his restraint broke and he shouted. A sudden scuffle followed. She seized his tie, drew close, and murmured that he had made the right choice. She kissed him, then whispered in his ear, sealing their pact and calling it an alliance. He kept a neutral face despite the fresh sting as he read the octopus message. He resolved to protect NewAgeManhwa and to hide his fear from others. Classmates smirked and jeered and called Lee Sujin the cat in passing. Lee Sujin stepped forward, prodded him about running away, and pushed until he snapped. A brief scuffle followed. She seized his tie, drew close, and murmured choice words. She kissed him and whispered that he had made the right choice and sealed an alliance. He staggered back, gasped, and muttered, "Oh my God," in shock. Later, they sat on the rooftop and spoke in low voices while the pact settled between them. The narrator kept his face steady despite fresh pain from the earlier strike. Lee Sujin stepped closer, prodded him about running, and pushed until he snapped. She seized his tie, drew near, and kissed him while whispering that he had made the right choice. He staggered back and gasped. Later, they sat on the rooftop as their pact settled. She framed the pact as action and said she would bully someone. He protested, but her voice broke. She wiped her face and turned away. He kept his face steady despite the fresh pain from the earlier strike. Lee Sujin stepped closer and pushed him until he physically snapped. She seized his tie, drew near, and kissed him while whispering approval. He staggered back, gasped, and looked down at a fallen bird by the lockers. Later, they sat on the rooftop and formed a terse pact about action. Lee Sujin framed the pact as a promise to bully, and her voice broke. He protested, but she wiped away tears and turned her face from him. They left the roof and later met two classmates on the field wearing neon vests. The students spoke, quietly exchanged uneasy looks, and readied themselves for the task. He kept his face steady despite the fresh pain from the earlier blow. Lee Sujin closed the distance, pushed until he snapped, seized his tie and kissed him while whispering approval. He staggered back and noticed a fallen bird near the lockers and tasted the moment. On the rooftop, they forged a terse pact framed as a promise to bully. She wiped her tears and turned away when he protested. They left and joined two classmates in neon vests on the field and readied themselves. He later sat with peers and quietly asked if this helped anyone. He kept his face steady despite the lingering ache from the earlier strike. Lee Sujin had closed the distance and forced a kiss, then wiped her tears when he protested. On the rooftop, they forged a terse pact framed as a promise to bully. Later, he sat at a table and sipped while confirming he would follow through. Two classmates in neon vests waited near the lockers, and a smirking student taunted them. The group moved toward the field together, and he wondered quietly if any of it helped anyone. He kept his face steady despite the lingering ache from the earlier strike. Lee Sujin had closed the distance and forced a kiss, then wiped her tears when he protested. On the rooftop, they forged a terse pact framed as a promise to bully. Later, he sat at a table and sipped while confirming he would follow through. Two classmates in neon vests waited near the lockers, and a smirking student taunted them. The group moved toward the field together. In the corridor, someone seized a classmate's face. A staff member then spoke sternly across a table, and Lee Sujin appeared smiling. He kept his expression steady despite the ache from the earlier blow. Lee Sujin had closed the distance and forced a kiss, then wiped her eyes when he pushed back. On the rooftop, they made a cold pact to bully others. Later, he sat at a table and drank, while confirming he would follow through. Two neon-vested classmates waited by the lockers, and a smirking student taunted them. In the corridor, someone seized a classmate's face as staff spoke across a table. Back in the classroom, two students tested a phone recording, and the smirker grinned while reaffirming the plan. A close shot lingered on a tearful eye, rimmed with fresh moisture. Students filled the auditorium while a teacher spoke from the front. Two neon-vested classmates waited by the lockers as the crowd flowed past. In the corridor, someone seized a classmate's face while staff tried to intervene and questions rose. Later in the classroom, two students checked a phone recording, replaying a tense clip. The smirking student moved through the group, grinning and reinforcing the plan. A final close-up captured that grin and the quiet confirmation that their scheme had unfolded as expected. A title card read DATHCOOL above the chapter number. The plaza and school facade followed as students gathered. Inside, a student rose and addressed a seated classmate while peers watched. Two students inspected a phone and replayed a short clip on a screen. The smirking student moved through the group and smiled in confirmation. Conversation tightened into a quiet plan as one student nodded. Two figures walked out of the room together, and the corridor fell empty. The final shot returned to the school exterior at midday. A title card displayed DATHCOOL as the scene opened on the school facade. Students gathered across the plaza and then moved inside. One student rose and addressed a seated peer while classmates watched. Two students huddled over a phone and replayed a short clip on a nearby screen. The smirking student moved through the group and offered a confirming smile. Conversation tightened into a quiet plan, and one student nodded. Two figures left together, and the corridor emptied. The sequence closed on the midday exterior of the school. A title card invoked DEATHCOOL as the scene opened on the school facade, and students moved inside. A gathered group watched one student rise and speak to a seated peer, while others huddled over a phone and replayed a clip. The smirking student passed through and confirmed what they had seen. Conversation tightened into a quiet plan, and two students left together. A tall student then returned, closed the distance, and promised to show the other. He delivered a hard blow to a bespectacled classmate. Nearby students gasped and rushed forward. A girl knelt and begged forgiveness while the victim slumped. The attacker walked off without looking back. After the hit, the group scattered, and the immediate chaos settled into a charged hush. The smirking student lingered with a small smile while others checked the scene. Two students spoke in low voices. One questioned choices and regretted not sitting with the victim. The other hardened his tone and pushed the first to finish what they had started. Tension snapped. A resentful student launched another ruthless strike, and hands blurred. Blood ran down a cheek as the instigator watched and smiled without looking away. He then beckoned the gathered students inside and signaled that the next phase would start. A caption set a 10-minute deadline for what came next soon. After the earlier chaos, the group remained still and watchful. The narrator pressed his fingers to the cut on his cheek as blood tracked down. A shoe struck the ground nearby, and a student crouched with guarded eyes. The smirking student lingered and did not look away. Voices were low and measured as the instigator motioned them to move inside under the 10-minute threat. The narrator stood and answered in a flat voice. Two figures then walked out together, and one spoke plainly that the result was what he had wanted. After the earlier chaos, the group remained rigid and watchful. The narrator pressed his fingers to the cut on his cheek as blood tracked downward. A shoe struck the ground nearby, and a crouched student kept guarded eyes on the scene. The smirking student did not look away. Voices dropped as an instigator ordered everyone inside within 10 minutes. The narrator rose and answered in a flat voice. Two figures walked forward together, and one spoke plainly that this outcome was what he had wanted. He then argued that anger toward strangers justified their action. After the earlier chaos, the group stayed rigid and watchful. The narrator pressed his fingers to the cut on his cheek as blood tracked downward. A student stepped forward and blamed him aloud, breaking the fragile quiet. Two figures advanced together and said this outcome was what they had wanted. Their speech framed anger toward strangers as justification. The smirking student watched without pity while others tensed. Voices rose, the crowd surged, and hands reached for the narrator. Neon-vested classmates and deviant seniors formed a ring as shoves began. The narrator kept his face blank and waited. After the earlier chaos, the group remained rigid and watchful around the narrator. A smirking student stepped forward and taunted them with a mocking smile. Inside, the narrator framed that anger as the last small spark of hope. Before it could grow, another student screamed and struck the smirking boy. The blow silenced the taunt and crushed the narrator's fragile expectation there. An accusing voice promised daily torment and warned of deeper disgust toward Goyon. The crowd stepped back and the room braced for what would come next. After the earlier chaos, the group remained rigid and watchful around the narrator. A smirking student stepped forward and taunted them with a mocking smile. The narrator framed that anger as the last small spark of hope. Before it could grow, an unknown attacker screamed and struck the smirking student, silencing the taunt and crushing the narrator's fragile expectation. The strike ignited a brief violent surge as other students moved in. An accusing voice promised daily torment and warned of deeper disgust toward Goyon. The crowd stepped back and the room braced for what would come next. After the crowd had stepped back, the room still braced for fresh violence. A student lay face down with a shoe pressing his chest while others watched. A close shot showed blood at one student's mouth and an enraged eye. The assembled students surged forward with chaotic motion and raw force. Someone shouted for the assault to stop and tried to intervene. An attacker seized a fallen classmate and struck him hard, producing a pained cry. The smirking student mocked from the edge, while another student delivered a sudden blow. The narrator remained bruised as threats and taunts persisted. An attacker raised his shoe and slammed it down on the prone student. Blood rimmed the student's lip as he tried to gasp and push up. The assembled students wrenched and shouted, but no decisive help quickly arrived. An attacker seized the fallen student again and struck him to silence a cry. A smirking student lingered at the fringe and offered low, mocking laughter. When the blows stopped, the attacker stepped back and watched with calm eyes. The narrator lay bruised and aching, while threats and whispers circled the room. No one moved forward to help before the man breathed out and turned away. The unknown attacker resumed his blows and slammed down with a shoe until the narrator could barely breathe. Blood pooled and the narrator tried to push up, while cries and shouts rose around them. No decisive help reached the fallen student. A smirking student lingered and sneered.